But the more voters see of the Trump agenda, the less they like it. A spate of new polls are all showing the same thing, that the only president who is less popular than Donald Trump at this point in their term is, well, Donald Trump during his first administration. An ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll released yesterday puts Trump's approval at 39%. That's the lowest of all recent polls. An NBC News poll puts his approval rating at 45%. Voters appear to be deeply frustrated with Trump's handling of the economy and the chaos that's been caused by the Trump tariffs. A New York Times poll released just Friday reveals that half of all voters think that Trump, who ran on a platform of economic growth, has actually made the economy worse. But this feedback has not yet broken through at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The Atlantic reports that during an interview, quote, Trump pushed back on the notion, popular among some Wall Street analysts, that financial turmoil, plummeting markets, the threat of a recession, a weakened dollar, would cause him to roll back his tariff policies. It always affects you a little bit, he said, but there's no red line, no certain number at which he would feel compelled to change course. That's right. Despite the fact that he has already paused his so-called reciprocal tariffs, Trump is actually doubling down on tariffs and trade wars, arguably one of his most unpopular policies. He says he has no red line, that there's no point at which he confronts so much resistance that he would feel compelled to back down. That take no prisoners, forget nothing approach is how the Trump administration has tackled almost everything on its agenda, from mass deportations to targeting law firms to gutting federal agencies from USAID to the Department of Education. When asked about the difference between the first Trump term and the second term, Trump told The Atlantic, quote, the first time I had two things to do, run the country and survive. I had all these crooked guys. And the second time, I run the country and the world. Spoken like a true wannabe autocrat. A New York Times poll found that 54% of Americans think that Trump has overreached, and that number includes 16% of Republicans. An unpopular president with an unpopular agenda seems like a golden opportunity for the opposition party. But how will the Democrats seize the moment, and how will they fight back against Trumpism? That remains a fraught conversation even within the party. And that means it's an opening for J.B. Pritzker. At a speech in New Hampshire on Sunday, the Illinois governor called for Democrats to, quote, fight everywhere and all at once. Take a listen.
Never before in my life have I called for mass protests, for mobilization, for disruption. But I am now. These Republicans cannot know a moment of peace. They have to understand that we will fight their cruelty with every megaphone and microphone that we have. We must castigate them on the soapbox and then punish them at the ballot box.
And that is where we begin today, with managing editor of the Bulwark and MSNBC contributor Sam Stein. Also joining us is former Democratic Senator and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill and former Republican Congressman David Jolly. David recently registered as a Democrat and is considering a run for the Florida governorship. Sam, let me start with you. What's your take on where things stand with the voters and their views of Donald Trump just 100 days in?
Well, I think it's fairly clear at this point that he's lost a lot of ground with a lot of voters on a lot of issues, frankly. He didn't have a particularly high approval rating when he entered office, but he had one higher than he had any time in his first term. And he had a particularly high approval rating on his key issues, which were immigration and, to a degree, cost of living. And what we've seen in 100 days is that he's just seen that whittle away. First on cost of living and tariffs, second on immigration. And the only conclusion that you can have watching it all is that a lot of this is just self-inflicted, right? The Liberation Day was a disastrous economic policy. I think since then he's tried to clean it up, but the damage is largely done. Psychologically, the markets are not happy Voters do not feel like the cost of living has come down. And in fact, they're very worried, according to every economic metric, about the future. And then on immigration, he's turned a debate that he was winning, which was a debate about border and deportation. He's made it into a debate that he's losing, which is about the rights and due process granted to people in this country, even those who were here illegally. And so he doesn't have a good hand to play like he did at the beginning. And if anything, he's making it worse.
So, Sam, can I follow up on that? You're right. He is bungling even the issues that he was leading on before, like immigration, by denying due process rights, deporting children. But he's also saying things like, I rule the country and I rule the world, which seems very autocracy forward. Is this bluster, or is this going to be the defining ethos of his term, and it won't matter what the voters think?
I've given up trying to figure out what goes on inside every utterance Donald Trump makes. It could be bluster, but it could just be how he thinks, right? I think ultimately the first question is, why did voters sour on him? And I think to a degree it's because of that bluster and those comments, but mainly it's because, in my estimation, it's because he hasn't delivered on the things he said he would, right? I mean, he said he would bring down the cost of goods. He said he would have your energy bill. He said he would solve the war in Ukraine within a year. He said he would have mass deportations. On all of those, including the mass deportations, he has come up short of where he set his own metrics. And that mass bluster, which seemed fine when those metrics seemed achievable, now seems detached and scary for those who wanted him to actually make change.
So, David Jolly, I'm going to harp on this for a while. I don't think I've ever heard an American say something like, I rule the country and I rule the world. Am I missing something? Is this something that American presidents routinely say, or does this sound like something else to you?
I think it sounds like something else, and put me in the camp that after 8 to 10 years of Donald Trump being in the political scene, we have to take him at his word. When he suggests he might run for a third term, that's a possibility, or he rules the world, we should believe that that reflects his ethos. But I think where the disconnect is, to your point, Melissa, why are his numbers in at 39% if he portrays such strength? It's because he never actually had that mandate and that strength. Sam's right that he's lost a lot of ground, but he didn't have a lot of ground to start with. He was elected by a minority coalition in the country. I know it was very close, but more Americans in November voted for someone else for president than those who voted for Donald Trump. Donald Trump came in under 50%. He declared a mandate. He liked to brand a mandate around his election, but he never had one. And so rather than step out cautiously and say, what do I do with my 49% coalition? How do I grow it? How do I try to govern the entire country? He doubled down on what divides the country and, frankly, on economic policies that simply don't work. He is ignorant when it comes to trade policy. He's demonstrating that. He's injected economic insecurity into people's personal lives. And so that fragile 49% coalition he had is showing a natural erosion. And so this question then of a man who thinks he rules the world and rules the country, is he capable of self-correcting? He's suggesting maybe he's not.
Well, and this would seem, Claire, to be a great opening for the opposition party. Bad poll numbers definitely matter, and it shows that there is popular opposition to Donald Trump. Might that shape the administration's actions and priorities? Possibly. But relatedly, is there an opportunity here for the Democrats to take advantage of a kind of piling on effect where people and institutions are more likely to oppose and resist an unpopular president rather than a popular one?
Yeah, I think part of the problem you have is there's a wealth of issues to attack Donald Trump on. And the lack of organization in terms of focusing on various areas is being interpreted, I believe, perhaps correctly by the Democratic base, that the Democratic elected officials aren't doing anything. But you've got some Democratic officials going after him on prices. You've got some going after him on his executive orders and pushing the envelope there. You've got some going after him, a lack of due process on immigration. You've got some going after him on what's going on college campuses and the defunding of medical research in the country, and on and on and on. Nobody's even getting around to the fact that this is the most corrupt president in American history. He's auctioning off for his own personal gain access to the presidency. through all of his crypto stuff and selling things and making money off of it. So you've got so much there, and the base is so frustrated that he's doing this and that he got away with so much, and he's back in the Oval Office, that they see this scattershot effort as ineffective. And I think over time, a leader, whether it's Chris Murphy or whether it's Cory Booker or whether it's J.B. Pritzker or whether it's Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro, I think, or all the other talented people we have waiting to fill in this leadership vacuum, they're going to be battling for the attention of the American public. And in that process, the one that's the most organized, the most forceful, who is the most charismatic and can lead in a way that gets people to follow, especially independent voters, everyone who doesn't like Donald Trump will coalesce around them.
Joining us now, NBC's Vaughn Hillyard, who's covering the White House. Ashley Parker, staff writer for The Atlantic. Her interview with the president is the June cover story. Also with us, Carlos Curbelo, former Republican congressman from Florida. So, Vaughn, what else is the White House saying about all this?
Right. Well, number one, Jose, there is now an express pattern here that we have seen from this administration over the last weeks, making claims about individuals who they have removed or sought to remove from the United States. In the instance of some individuals who they had claimed had gang affiliations, yet it presented no facts or no details as to their connections. And now in this case, you have the individuals, the mothers, denying through their legal representation that they made the decision to have their children be removed from the country to Honduras with them. In the case of one 4-year-old boy who is receiving cancer treatment. And from the administration standpoint, they have continued over the last weeks, and including here today from Tom Homan and Caroline Leavitt, making the case that these were individuals who were, number one, in the country illegally in an undocumented status. And that is where the family members who have been deported with them are by nature going to suffer the consequences of the decisions that their parents, or in the cases that these mothers made, to come into the United States and have their children here despite being undocumented. I want to let you listen to the press secretary earlier this morning.
This president is trying to simply enforce our nation's immigration laws and is facing roadblock after roadblock. So we're complying with court orders, but as Tom Homan has said every day, we're going to continue to forge ahead with this mass deportation campaign, and the president is open to all remedies to do that.
And again, the question here is, to what extent is the administration following court orders? Kilmar Abrego Garcia remains in El Salvador, and in the case of these three young U.S. citizen children, they have already been removed from the United States and are already in Honduras, Jose.
So, Carlos, I'm just wondering, because, you know, Donald Trump and Tom Homan, for the entire presidential election, were talking about something like this. If it ever happened, that would be the outcome, right? U.S.-born children, and if their parents are undocumented and are being deported, they have the choice to whether bring them along or not. But the question is the due process issue. And I'm just wondering, Carlos, do you think this is going to have some kind of weight in the White House? Carlos, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if... Check the mute button there for a second.
It was not the mute button, but what I was saying is that while the administration understands that there's still broad public support for aggressive enforcement of immigration law in this country, they also know that there's a breaking point. And these human stories, I remember this from the first Trump term when I was serving in Congress, when the child separation policy shocked so many Americans. That's when the administration lost the public on the immigration issue. The immigration issue has been Donald Trump's signature issue, his strongest issue. The country's willing to be patient with him and with Republicans as they try to correct some of the excesses of under the previous administration. But once these human stories really start connecting with the public in a very dramatic way, then that becomes a danger zone for the administration. They could lose the public, and that, of course, could be bad news for congressional Republicans as they head into the next election.
Actually, in your interview for The Atlantic, you asked the president what would happen if his administration accidentally deported the wrong person, a legal resident or even a U.S. citizen. He said, quote, "Let me tell you that nothing will ever be perfect in this world." What do you think he meant by that?
I think he meant that the administration will make mistakes. As The Atlantic reported, they have already, in court filings, for instance, admitted that they've made mistakes. That the Maryland father who was deported to a prison in El Salvador, that was a quote-unquote administrative error. That was a mistake. It was an interesting response. And in fact, if you believe that nothing in life will be perfect, that is in fact an argument for due process.
And actually, I just want to know, because you know, it is such an unusual, right, thing that the president would sit down with The Atlantic and you know, give you and your colleagues so much time to do it. Well, unusual because of, you know, there's been no love lost from the president towards The Atlantic. Take us into that room. Take me into that moment in that interview.
Sure. So for our cover story, the backstory is kind of wild. So I'm just going to start a little back before that Oval Office interview. We're doing a cover on President Trump. We wanted to explain his remarkable political comeback and how he is wielding power now. We had put in for an interview request, as you would with any White House. We were tentatively told we had one. Then right as we were about to go in, this is about a month or two ago, someone showed the president some things I had said and written that he didn't like, and he very publicly on Truth Social canceled that interview, attacking me and my co-author Michael Shearer by name. We then were able to get the president's cell phone number. Michael called him on a Saturday morning in Bedminster. It's an unknown number to the president. He picked up, said hello, and spoke with Michael for 20 minutes. So we had that interview, and then after the story had closed and gone to the presses, we actually got a call last week from an aide to the president who said, "Are you guys free, along with your boss, editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, tomorrow, you know, a day away, to come into the Oval Office and interview the president?" We were told we'd have 20 minutes, and we ended up having an hour. So the entire thing has been a bit of a whirlwind.
And, you know, Jeffrey Goldberg, who was involved in that whole Signal Gate issue, actually, what was the kind of like the back and forth like?
Sure. It's a question so many people have, understandably. And, you know, if you've covered Trump, the one thing you know about him, the thing that is very consistent is he is someone who is trying to win the minute, the hour, the day, the person directly in front of him. And he's very savvy about his audience and his goals. So he had attacked us on Truth Social several times, specifically Jeff Goldberg. But when we went in that moment, President Trump was the version of himself that is charismatic, charming, respectful. In the interview, he was very much oriented towards Jeff, kind of trying to win him over to make sure that Jeff really understood where Donald Trump, was coming from, what was his plan, as he put it, you know, to save humanity for this term in his presidency. And one other interesting thing, when he had attacked Jeff most recently on the morning of our interview, he had said, you know, Signalgate was somewhat of a success. And so when we went in, Jeff asked him, what exactly did you mean by that? Did you mean, you know, we exposed operational security flaws that you have now corrected? And it was sort of a game respects game moment, actually. The president said, no, it was a success because you really broke through. You really dominated the news cycle. And Trump, in many ways, in addition to being the president of the United States, is sort of a frustrated media mogul. And he respects someone who can own a news cycle, which is what Jeff in The Atlantic did with Signalgate.
Yeah, and Carlos is thinking about owning the news cycle. It's something that the president is very keen and has been very keen on. Even before he was in politics, that was his focus. The polls that are coming in, and there are a new series of polls. The most recent ones, for the most part, they show a majority approve of the plan to deport people here illegally. The question is how it's being done. For example, in a new CBS News YouGov poll, 73% say it's not acceptable for legal U.S. residents to be mistakenly detained. 81% say it's not acceptable for legal U.S. residents to be mistakenly deported. 67% believe non-citizens should face a court hearing or other legal processes before being deported. The president posting this morning, we don't have a free and fair press in this country anymore. We have a press that writes bad stories, cheats big on polls. It is compromised and corrupt. So which one of the two is it, Carlos?
Well, look, the president can dismiss these polls, Jose, but I can tell you that congressional Republicans are watching these polls very closely because they're up next, right? They have to face voters in November. And look, the president may dismiss the polls, but he also understands that he doesn't want Democrats in control of Congress. He would like to continue advancing his agenda for as long as possible. So, yes, this is standard Donald Trump, dismiss the polls, counter whatever information is being put out there. But at the end of the day, they do care about these polls. They do adjust to them. We certainly have seen that with the tariff policy. We have seen that with Doge and Elon Musk. And I think the point you were making at the beginning is also very important. A lot of these issues are issues where the administration is where the public is at, or at least a majority of the public is at. The problem they're having is how they are approaching these issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's tariff policy, or even these government reform efforts. People support making government more efficient, but they want it to be done in a humane, coherent, and predictable way.
We've been talking about polls this morning, and Donald Trump's polls. He's got the lowest approval mark of any past president at this point in their first or second terms. A new ABC News Washington Post poll finds 39% of Americans approve of the way the president's doing his job compared to 55% who disapprove. He's dropped 10 points among white people without college degrees, obviously a key part of his political coalition. The Washington Post also notes the president's underwater among independents, a group he narrowly lost in November. When it comes to top issues, more than 3 out of 4 voters oppose reducing federal funding for medical research. 7 in 10 oppose the administration's efforts to increase the government's role in private universities and how they operate. And more than 6 in 10 oppose shutting down the Department of Education, cutting back environmental regulations, and freezing foreign aid that provides food and health care to poor countries. But overall, the voters said they trust President Trump more than Democrats in Congress when it comes to handling the country's main problems. When it comes to economy, Trump's approval rating stands at 39% versus 61% who disapprove. Just 2 months before announcing the tariffs, 45% approved and 53% disapproved. It's worth noting President Biden's economic approval rating was 37% about a year ago. And John, obviously, again, a lot of bad news for Donald Trump there about where Americans are viewing his presidency 100 days in, and not good news for Democrats because as badly as things are going for Donald Trump right now, people still trust him +7 on key issues. So you wonder if it's Donald Trump against a generic Democrat, whatever, if the election were held today or tomorrow, I think would have despite these low approval numbers, I think would have a very close election until Democrats figure out a way to define who they are and what they are in a way that is more, as Molly said last hour, the way that's not just opposing Donald Trump. Okay, oppose Donald Trump, fine. Now, what are you going to do for us after you oppose Donald Trump? And right now, Democrats are still scrambling to get that message, and it's showing in these polls.
Yeah, the generic Democrat ahead of the generic Republican in a potential 2026 midterm
Congress,
poll. Yeah, in Congress, that's right. But it's different when Trump is on the ballot. We've seen that the last 3 presidential elections. Democrats would say, well, he can't run again. Although we should note, in the Atlanta cover story, Donald Trump was asked that question, and he sort of didn't dismiss it outright, sort of said, had a little fun with the idea of a 2028 bid. But that, of course, is something that I know some Democrats are concerned he might do. But we're at the 100 days mark for Donald Trump. That's this week. So that's why we have this raft of polls for Trump. And let's add to them, most of them not good news. The latest AP NORC poll finds that 39% approve of how Trump is doing his job, while a whopping 59% disapprove. This comes as 62% feel the country's headed in the wrong direction. That's an important number. On the issues, Trump is underwater on the economy, immigration, trade, and foreign policy. Furthermore, 44% say that Trump is mostly focused on the wrong priorities. When broken down by party, only slightly more than half of Republicans say that Trump's priorities are right. And there are more polls. Two new ones show that support for President Trump is collapsing among Hispanic voters, which have been the fastest growing group of Republican supporters. A new CNN poll finds that Trump's approval among Hispanic Americans now stands at just 28%. That's down 7 points since March. Similarly, the latest Pew poll has him at 27% approval among Hispanic Americans there as well. Joining the conversation, we have politics bureau chief and senior political columnist for Politico, Jonathan Martin, senior editor and elections analyst of the nonpartisan Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, Dave Wasserman, the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitali, the president of Voto Latino Foundation, Maria Teresa Kumar. She joins us with even more new polling conducted together by Voto Latino and the Latino Community Foundation. We'll get to that in a moment. And also with us, the author of the Substack newsletter Fresh Hell, Tina Brown. She's also the co-host of the upcoming Truth Tellers, Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Summit. That's on May 7th in London. We also will preview that in just a moment. So, Joe, we've got a great group assembled here a little after the hour at 7 a.m. Perhaps they'll weigh in on the NFL draft while we're at it. Yes. But it's certainly to talk about what is an important snapshot of this the country's political situation as we hit the 100-day mark. And basically, voters don't like anybody.
Nobody. That's the amazing thing. Dave Wasserman, you look at all these headlines, you're like Donald Trump. I mean, lowest approval ratings ever, first 100 days, upside down on everything, including immigration. You're going, this is the worst news for any party. The Democrats ahead of the Republicans in generic balloting. And then in one poll, voters are asked, I think it's the Washington Post poll, who do you trust more on the issue that matters most to you? Donald Trump is +7 over Democrats, and the Democrats' brand is as low as it's ever been. So help us. What does all of this mean?
Well, Joe, the key there is neither taking 30%, right? Donald Trump's approval was defying gravity for quite a while, and now we're seeing it come back down to earth in a big way. For the first 100 days, we've seen his economic approval lag his overall approval, which is the opposite of what we saw in the first Trump term. And the question is really how this translates into votes. I think we'll get a good indicator in Virginia and New Jersey. Frankly, I don't think the Virginia race is on track to be competitive this fall, given the turnout dynamic we saw in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. Fundamentally, Trump voters, his base, they're not coming out for Republicans not named Trump. I think what it speaks to is that just because Trump gained among working class non-white voters in 2024 doesn't mean that those voters are suddenly part of the Trump coalition. They were fundamentally pocketbook voters who behaved in a fairly rational way. They didn't like the inflation under Joe Biden, but they're not seeing Donald Trump rein in prices. They're not necessarily going to be moved on the cultural issues that Trump is counting on to mitigate the weakening economy and tariffs. And many of those voters might not show up at all. And so, for example, in the Wisconsin race, you had 78% of Kamala Harris's voters effectively turn out for the Democratic endorsed candidate. Only 63% was the number that the Republican got out of Trump's vote total from last November. And if that repeats, Republicans are going to be on track to lose the House.
Yeah, in a big way. J. Mart, again, you never know what's going to happen, but you look so far at well, you look at these poll numbers. I want you to talk about that. You look at the generic ballot, as badly as Democrats are doing in the Fox News generic ballot, Democrats are up 5-6 points over Republicans. You usually don't see that kind of spread. We saw it in 2017 before Democrats' big win in 2018, but as Dave said, Trump voters don't come out for Republicans not named Trump a lot of times. Right. And so that's the reality. That Trump brand is just not transferable when he's not on the ballot, number one. And then number two, you put these numbers on top of that, it certainly seems like that would be very bad news for members of Congress, Republicans who are running. I'm curious, what was your takeaway from all the polling we've seen to mark Donald Trump's first 100 days in office?
Joe, the thing I keep coming back to is that these are self-inflicted wounds that Donald Trump has chosen. To borrow an old phrase, they're wars of choice. If he had not done Doge and Elon Musk, and if he had not done Liberation Day and a tariff regime, think about where his numbers would be today. Think about if he takes the oath on January 20th, and the first 100 days, he cracks down on illegal immigration. He does executive orders on woke this, woke that. And then, yeah, he brings in a series of CEOs every week to the Oval Office, some domestic, some from abroad, and just jawbones the economy and talks about the big, beautiful jobs he's creating. He'd be over 50, at least at 50 today. Yeah. It's remarkable. This is at his own hand, Joe, that he has done this to himself. Not any external forces. Lord knows it wasn't the Democratic opposition. He has driven his own numbers down to 40 in 100 days.
Well, you know, I had said when he was getting sworn in, if he went golfing every day, if he... Yeah. You know, did what Dwight Eisenhower made people think Ike did, you know, he'd be over 50%, just riding the economy out. He obviously didn't do that. And I want to bring up, you talked about Doge. This is how fast Washington moves. And it proves what I've been saying to members of administrations for 30 years now. Was that a good shot? Good selfie? What do you think? How did you look, J. Mart? Did you look good? Good? Okay, good. So anyway, there's a, you know, I've been telling administrations for years now, Washington always wins. You got to figure out how to play inside the guardrails. You try to go outside the guardrails, you're not going to, it's not going to end up well for you. You bring up Doge. Here's Elon Musk, who 2 months ago, most powerful guy ever in Washington, D.C. that wasn't part of a government. He's basically, you know, limping out of town, $150 billion poorer. Nobody feeling sorry for him, of course. But basically, you know, reportedly telling friends, I'm out of here. You know, this is too much. J. Mark?
Yeah, no, look, there's no question about it. He is somebody who thought he was going to transform the government, literally thought he was going to find billions of savings in the federal government, and he comes to realize he didn't know that much about the federal government because, look, if you can't touch entitlements and you can't touch defense, you're not going to get real savings in the federal government. So he's left with a legacy of, you know, driving some modest but, you know, serious programs basically off the cliff, but really getting no real substantive savings in terms of the budget, and then having to go back to his main company, which is also plummeting. And so, yeah, it's not a great legacy. And again, for Donald Trump, I don't understand why somebody, Joe, as you know, he's not a small government conservative. Donald Trump's the king of debt. He's never cared about the shrinking the size of the government. That's not been his thing. He's not a Grover Norquist guy. He brought somebody on who was going to slash government programs in ways that were ultimately going to be politically unpopular, because of course eventually he'd be talking about stuff that was not popular to cut. And surprise, surprise, Elon's on his way out before the summer, and Donald Trump's the one whose numbers have taken a hit.
Welcome back. Just a day to go until the end of President Trump's first 100 days in office, and new polling is showing a considerable drop in his approval, including in some of his key issues. A number of recent polls show Trump underwater, with more than half of Americans disapproving of his performance overall. And when you look at issues like immigration and the economy, where he was previously strong, Trump's numbers are upside down there as well. The president, perhaps unsurprisingly, taking note of it taking note of these headlines, posting on social media this morning to call them sick and those who write about them the enemy of the people, adding he thinks these pollsters should be investigated for election fraud. Joining me now is Sam Stein, managing editor of the Bulwark and an MSNBC contributor, and Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. Sam, first to you, any surprises in these numbers that we see?
I guess in the macro sense, yeah, how quickly it's all fallen apart, right? First of all, Trump didn't start off necessarily on a high note. I mean, relative to what he was in the first term, it was improved, but relative to other presidents, it was not a great starting point for a newly elected president, or in this case, I guess, a second-term president. But it's all kind of come apart fairly fast, and it's all been fairly self-inflicted. That's the other surprise. The trade wars, the tariffs, Liberation Day, those all took, obviously, a huge chunk out of his approval rating. But then you look at the immigration stuff, too, and there was a case where he had immense popularity. The public was clearly backing his initiatives. And what did he do? He took a winning issue and he turned it into a kind of secondary issue, which is, can he and should he be able to defy the courts? And on that front, he's really lost ground with the public. And I think these are self-inflicted wounds. And it's not like he has one thing that he could hold on to now to claw his way back. Or conversely, not like there's one thing that's causing the downfall. It's across the spectrum on all the issues, which makes it that much harder for him to crawl back up in popularity.
I think that's a really important point here, and the self-inflicted nature of it, of course, cannot go unstated. But Susan, we've seen immigration be a consistently key issue for Trump as he continues to push his mass deportation efforts. But again, the polling shows, as Sam mentioned, that a majority of Americans do not approve. And the larger question here is whether or not these bad polls will play the same role as, frankly, a diving stock market did, be a force that could make the administration scale back or reverse course. What do you think?
Well, first, I think when it comes to the immigration numbers going down, and Sam touched on this, it's about the due process and also what the messaging was. He was going to take violent criminals and deport them. And now we see mothers who do the right thing and check in with ICE on their 6-month renewal, or not renewal, but check-in time that they're required to do. Then they get arrested 2 days later and their child's deported. That's not what Americans signed up for. He should have stayed on violent criminals. That's the first part. The second part, I don't think Donald Trump really will respond that much to these poll numbers. He's gotten away with a lot thus far with just his base. As long as his base holds for him, he got through January 6th, he got through having a mugshot, and he got through 34 felony convictions. That's where he's focused. The problem that he will have is moving his agenda with members of the House who are up for re-election in 2 years, and they can't go along with all this. They can't have him anchoring them down.
I think that's the really important connection piece there, because, Sam, we talk about immigration. We can also talk about the economy, because in the Washington Post ABC Ipsos poll, 53% say the economy is worse since Trump took office. 72% believe Trump's policies will cause a recession. We've also heard those warnings from Wall Street. So is it sentiments like these that could ultimately upend an election? And I think the if there, Sam, is if it can be sustained, which then, of course, puts the onus on Democrats to carry this issue of the economy as a through line from now all the way until next November.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a risk of overanalyzing this. I think pretty much what's happening is people are saying, no, I don't think things are getting better, and my economic situation isn't getting better, and Trump promised me that situation was going to get better, and it's not. That's pretty simple stuff, right? And if you're a member of Congress, what do you do when you're faced with that? There's one way, which is you can try to show that you're a bulwark against Trump, that you're pushing back. Maybe you take votes saying, hey, we're going to take back the power of the tariffs, or at least, have a ceremonial vote saying we disagree with this stuff. But the other way is that you have to show that you're doing action, that you're taking action, I should say. And there's really, frankly, only one vehicle for them to do that in, and that's this reconciliation vehicle. So conversely, or ironically perhaps, the floundering popularity numbers, the feeling of unease that many voters have about the economy could compel Republicans to say, no, we have to do something We can't just sit on our hands. We have to show that we're giving the voters something, and that might compel them to actually get that big bill done.
And we are watching these competing interests on Capitol Hill as they start to come back to town after a 2-week recess. You've got the budget hawks, of course, who are saying they need to see more than $1 trillion in cuts. You've got more moderate members saying they won't accept anything that includes cuts to Medicaid, despite the fact that almost definitely we're going to see those cuts because the Energy and Commerce Committee can only cut from so many other places. But Susan, I want to drill down on a larger takeaway that really struck me. And this one was from our NBC News Stay Tuned polling around the gender gap, specifically among Gen Z voters, which are voters under 30. 45% of Gen Z men say they approve of Trump's overall job performance compared to 25% of women. That's a 21-point difference. The divide is also visible on what issues they care about, too. But more, if we could zoom out a little bit, Susan, it feels like this is a cultural and political realignment that could have long-lasting implications for both parties, specifically among younger voters who are growing up with a really skewed worldview and a much different worldview than their male or female counterparts.
Yeah, when it comes to those younger male voters, Donald Trump made a big effort to reach out to them, and it helped. It certainly did. And when it comes to the younger women, I think they're finally realizing that, someone maybe of my age knew right away, is that rights were being taken away from them. They've never known anything but growing up in a where pro-choice, you could be pro-choice. They've never seen things taken, and that's what Donald Trump has done, and it disproportionately affects women. It's not surprising to see women on cultural issues finding Donald Trump as a bully, for example. So those do play, and again, going to those midterm elections, which it all comes down to in a lot of ways, women tend to show up in those midterm elections if properly motivated. So the Democrats are equally challenged because they don't have a message. But if they could get one, they could probably bring out those women.
Yeah, I think, Sam, the same question, though, on the other side of the gender equation, which is what do Democrats have to do to start appealing to some of these male voters, both across the board, but specifically with young men that veered away from the party?
Well, the first thing they have to do is talk to them. They're not going to reach them unless they talk to them. And we're starting to see some members of the party make the overtures and make the appearances on the programs that they watch and adopt some of the new social media tools that these people are using as well. But it's not that profound. And frankly, part of that is because I think it's partly because they don't have the communicators effectively to do it. But also, we have to keep in mind, Trump kind of blots out everything else, right? Like, no matter what is happening, the storyline is Donald Trump. And he does have a better hold on those voters than he does on their female counterparts in that generational cohort. But it is slipping. And I think, if I were the White House, I would find that troubling because that's the place where you invested tons of resources, made tons of overtures and outreach. If that starts to slip, then you're in real trouble. Democrats do have to make a play for it. But I think ultimately, this really does come down to Trump and whether in a referendum on his legacy and his time in office.
Yeah, as it so often does, and as midterms, the first year of midterms after a presidential so often do, always a referendum. The always profound Sam Stein and Susan Del Percio, thank you both for coming on with us.